computer. Great. Well, welcome everyone. I just to give you, I know we've got a few new people here as well, just to say a little bit about who we are at Thinkers and Doers. So we're a network of people who were inspired by the different ways of working that surfaced during the pandemic, whether that was working with a new sense of freedom and permission, or working much more collaboratively, sharing our challenges, or just refocusing our attention on the people our systems are meant to serve. And what we're determined to do as a network is take that experience and that learning from that time into our current work and our future work as well. So that's what we're all about. And I want to welcome especially Jamie from Warwick University. It's his first time. Fran as well, Coventry City Council, it's her first time. For the sake of the recording, hi Laurie, I know you've just told me you can't come and that you're going to catch up with the recording. So Laurie Harvey from Warwickshire County Council. Is there anyone else? Have I missed anyone it's their first time? No, maybe not. Anyway, you're all most welcome. What we're going to do, how the agenda is going to... Hi Leslie, hi. How the agenda is going to shake down is that we will spend a bit of time, for those of us that were there last time, reflecting on the Donna Hall session, and we've got some questions that we sent out ahead of time for you to have a little think about. So we'll go into some breakout rooms and have some discussion and common feedback. And then the main kind of event of this session is Adrienne who heads up customer services at Coventry City Council, who's got a presentation that she's going to share with us, and then we'd like to get some discussion and debate flowing about that. So those are the two main things we're going to do today. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Natalie, who I didn't say who I was. I know you can all read it, by the way, but I'm just one member of the organising team, and Natalie is another member of the organising team today.
Thanks, Claire. So the first thing we're going to do today is jump into some conversation. So partly to try and reflect on the last session that we had with Donna, who talked about her time at Wigan and Chorley councils and some of the social contracts she set up and some of the challenges with that, but the real benefit of it as well. But also try and capture some of the energy that we had in the last session and start trying to move things forward again. So Claire mentioned we had 3 questions that we want to reflect on. So we're going to have a breakout room for each of those questions. So hopefully we'll go very smoothly, but the way we're going to do it, and we're going to present the questions on the screen and I'll read through them. But depending on which breakout room and which question you'd like to have a chat about, if you can just put one word in the chat box, we'll then assign you to that room. So if you'd like to join breakout room 1, just write paradigm. In fact, actually, let's just use numbers maybe.
Yeah.
Let's just use numbers. So we've got three rooms. If you just put the number of the room that you'd like to join in the chat. The first room will be reflecting on the new local community paradigm, and we sent a bit of information about that, I believe, after the last session, and how we're creating ways to do this and build community power. The second is how we systemize listening. So Donna mentioned the huge power that came when they did more listening exercises in their organizations. So what we want to reflect on today is, what does getting evidence from citizens about what they really want look like? What are the opportunities and challenges on this? So what can we do in that space? And the third room will look at how we can have different conversations that are more whole person. And then what we'll do at the end, so we've got about 15 minutes in the breakout rooms for you to have those conversations. Hopefully we'll get a good balance of people in all 3. And then at the end, we'll come back and have 5 to 10 minutes of feedback. So if the first task I can ask you to do in your breakout room is to nominate a person, then we don't have to do the really awkward thing where there's silence and then we pick on someone. So we want to hear what was said in each room. So we can't be in all of them. So it'd be great if you can do that. And I think now we've got some of those through, I think Adam is going to do the magical technical stuff and start assigning you all. If you weren't at the Donna session, I think these questions are quite open, and I'm sure that you'll have some views on that anyway. So it's not a prerequisite that you're at the last session at all.
Wasn't expecting that. Oh.
Hello.
Hello. Hi Debbie. I'm really sorry. I don't recognise your name or where you're from. Is that the city council behind you, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'm in transformation, work with Karen Smith. I also work quite closely with Adrienne as well.
Oh, great. Welcome. By the way, the fact that I'm in the core organising team and I'm in this breakout doesn't mean I've got some kind of role. Just thought it was an interesting question.
Which means you're looking for someone to step up.
I'm just thinking, yeah, does anybody have any thoughts about it? Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, hi, Becky.
What's happened?
Oh, what happened there?
We all went back to the main meeting.
Oh,
were we all in room 3? No, we weren't.
no, I have no idea. It just kicked everybody out randomly.
Oh, right. It should have been, maybe you did 15 seconds instead of 15 minutes or something.
Oh, maybe.
Never mind.
Okay, let's try
again.
It's like time travel.
I'm getting seasick.
Here we are again. Yeah. How do we systematize? So the question was, how do we systematize? I'm not quite sure what that means, but systematize listening, and what are the opportunities and challenges on this?
I think sometimes we think we're listening when we're not. I think sometimes we ask questions in a way to get the answers that we want, rather than asking questions in an open way to see what the actual response is.
Yeah, I would agree, Debbie. And I think I'll just own this rather than saying what I think I think sometimes I do that because I'm a bit afraid of what the answer might be. And if people were to tell me something that I personally and professionally don't feel I can do anything about, how do I deal with that? So that much more open-ended, actually really being interested in what people think that they need or want or whatever. You know, it's so hard I find it really hard to come to that conversation with a totally open mind, because I've already got a narrative, like there's already things that I think they're going to ask me and it isn't going to be possible, and then I'll feel dreadful about that, or I'll feel paralyzed, or that will make the person feel even worse. So I think I think that for me and my services, we've been reluctant to do that.
Jim, you've got your hand up.
Oh yeah, just go for it. Yeah, go for
it. I guess for me is that real difference between consultation and co-production.
Yeah.
And co-production's talked of a lot, but you know, that is very much about going in with that sort of blank sheet and then having those discussions. And we've just embarked on a piece of work around we've done a piece of legislative theatre as part of City of Culture, focused on rough sleeping. And then from that piece of work, we're about to co-produce our rough sleeping strategy with rough sleepers, which is something that we've always wanted to do, but it's not something that we've taken that big step, because I think, as James, you know, it is slightly nerve-wracking around actually giving up some of that power, so to speak, to individuals, and actually then making sure that we act on what comes out of that, and we don't try and shape it to what we think it should go. Although, of course, you know, there needs to be an element of that, but it's around that true co-production, I think.
It's brave. You have to be quite courageous, Jim. So one of your colleagues was telling me about that, and I thought, good on you. Well done for taking the step.
Leslie.
Well, I want to hear more about what Jim was saying. So if I just speak really quickly and then we can go back to Jim, that'd be great. Because I want to know how it went, and was it a surprise to you what people told you? But I just wanted to make the point that listening, my first response to this was, listening as in, do we need to systematize or what is that word? Make part of our routine practice how we do sort of consultation and surveys and find out stuff from people. But there's another layer here which is much more basic, which is about, as professionals or providers or whoever we are, there's a way that we talk to, in the NHS, our patients or your clients or whoever your end users are, because the way that professionals, I'm talking from a healthcare perspective, the way we talk to our patients is completely prescribed, because there's certain things we're trying to find out, because we're trying to find out what the problem is so we can fix it. So you've got a script almost, and sometimes you can go off the script and you might learn much more relevant things, but you have to still kind of, there's like a tick box of things that you need to find out. So there's something much more fundamental here about how we actually speak to people on that one-to-one as we're providing services, and giving people the skills and tools to be able to do that. Because, you know, very, very experienced people, like if you have, you know, a very experienced GP will have a conversation with you about your home life, and from that conversation, they'll understand everything they need to know about your health. Whereas a newly qualified person will go through a checklist, how's this, how's that, you know. So there's something about the skill of having that conversation that gets the same information that you need, but in a way that's much more meaningful. Anyway, but Jim, can you tell us more about how your co-production went?
Yeah, so I guess we were fortunate in that we had Arts and Homelessness International, who got together a group of people with lived experience of rough sleeping, and a group of our outreach rough sleeping staff. And collectively, after having about 4 or 5 sessions, they produced a piece of theatre, which was around how people access services. So I had my team, in effect, acting out the role as officers and demonstrating, you know, some of the frustrations of their role in dealing with people, more frustrations not with the individuals but with our systems. And then we had the rough sleepers coming in and acting out their role of trying to access services. And then from that, there was an open session where we could get more involved as an audience. And it, you know, there was about 50 odd people there, I think. So, and then from that was a number of commitments that we made as a service that came out of discussions and people voting on what they saw as being the priorities. And then we committed to taking them away and working on them. And then from that, there will then be the piece of work which is around specifically around updating our rough sleeping strategy and our actions on that following COVID. So that was it in a nutshell.
Wow, that's really like innovative way of doing things.
Yeah, I'd like to say that it was my idea, but it certainly wasn't. It was something that the City of Culture put in place around homelessness, and particularly with Homelessness and Arts International as an organisation, who then brought in somebody who facilitated that legislative theatre, who is an expert on that and has done legislative theatre across the world. So that was it was a real opportunity as part of the City of Culture to do something quite innovative.
Just a really quick question to Jim. Was some of it hard to hear, you know, for the professionals? And did you get any defensive? Sometimes those encounters can be difficult and people can get, you don't want a defensive reaction in co-production, but it can go that way, or it can start that way before it moves on. Did any of that happen?
I'd like to think not. I think I was probably a little bit more defensive inside than I necessarily showed. I think, if I'm being brutally honest, you know, that it was around, you know, it is quite difficult to hear around some of those things around how your service works and some of the difficulties that people have accessing it. But I think we took it on the chin and we worked together to look at solutions. So I'd like to think not, Claire, but we probably were slightly. I think what helped was our staff working with the rough sleepers to develop the theatre, broke down those barriers between those groups before they got to showing it to us. And I think that helped in terms of our staff not being defensive, because they'd worked on that piece of theatre.
And I think, yeah, I mean, I went to something that's become quite infamous a few months ago at the Belgrade, focusing on people's lived experiences of homelessness. And I think if I'm brutally honest, Jim, there was that defensiveness initially, because but I think it's okay to acknowledge that, as in it's hard to hear, isn't it? Because there can often be a difference between what as officers or, you know, local authority leaders or whatever think we're doing, and then how that is received by the people. So often people will come up with, you know, what they would like to see in their lives, and our response can be, but we already do that. And you have to create an environment where both of those truths are allowed to be present. You know, so it's not that one thing is more truth than another. It's, well, our truth is that we've attempted to do that. Your truth is that you either haven't received it, accessed, or it hasn't helped. And both those things are allowed to be, although it's uncomfortable. It's not a sense of is one right or is one wrong. It's just people's different perspectives. But like you say, if you're committed to a journey of that, I suppose that's what the sort of systematization might be. If you're committed to continue to try and do that, then that becomes less, you over time, you become less defensive or
Sorry, just very quickly, but I think that was, you know, that was a separate piece of work. I think with this one, because there is the involvement in the actual developing of it across everybody, then everybody accepted what then was presented was probably a true reflection of things that happened and the way that the system works and sometimes disadvantages people. So I think that helped us get over that piece that you're talking to, Jane, where there was, I know, and I wasn't there, but there was a lot more defensiveness because there was a feeling through my staff team that it wasn't reflecting the situation, whereas when they co-develop something, there is more the buy-in from everyone, I think. But of course, everybody's view is pertinent.
Anyone else want to speak to this? How do we systematize listening, and what are the challenges and opportunities for us?
Yeah, I would like to add something, if that's okay. So I've got a project that I'm trying to get underway. I've been trying to get underway for 6 months to collect information in this kind of very open way with informal carers, because the idea is that informal carers have thought about the person they care about over and over again for many, many hours and days, and of a very rich resource of ideas and a rich resource of real experience of what's happened. And it's been really interesting to hear colleagues talk just now about maybe being afraid of what we'll find out and how to deal with that. I've certainly seen some reluctance. And I think that reluctance is around not about not wanting to know, but exactly what one of the colleagues was saying around not knowing what to do with that information, not having the resource to deal with that information that we may find out. And in a way, that's almost a barrier to start. So that's been really fascinating to hear about that, to be honest. So I just wanted to add that in, and I hope that we can emulate some of the success of the rough sleeping strategy that I've just heard about, but we'll see.
Brilliant, thank you. Great idea. That you're right, they are a rich resource that often their insights are not tapped into. Anyone else like to? Oh, Leslie's got a hand up. I'm not going to say legacy hand. I refuse to say legacy hand, Leslie.
Sorry, I'm trying to get my video back on. Is it on? Hi.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm eating, so I didn't want to. Anyway, right. So I just a question for everybody. So it sounds like we all want to do this thing where we listen better in whatever sort of service or authority we work in. But do you think we have the skill set to do it? Or do you think we need to invest some time in learning how to do this thing differently? And could that be a Coventry approach or a Warwickshire approach or whatever? And you know, there's definitely a keenness there, and in the various different programs that I'm involved in, which mostly are Coventry focused, there's this real sense that we want to do listening and consultation differently. But do you think we know how to do it? And if we don't, what steps could we take to kind of put some of those skills out and about?
At Warwick University, we have we've got a project funded by the Spirit of 2012, the legacy funder for the Olympic Games, based in Canley in Coventry, looking at how we can bring in creative cultural engagement. It's a 3-year project, really exciting. We've had a parade and an open air film screening and lots of exciting things that have all been genuinely co-created with the community we're working with over the last few months. But one of the things we looked back at our funding application earlier this week, and we realised that one of the things we committed to do before we did anything was to do some proper training on active listening, and we hadn't done that. And we're starting this conversation as well about what the little project team of about 7 of us, what do we actually do for that active listening training? And we discovered that one of our academics has some expertise in that, and so he's going to facilitate some training sessions for us. Now, I'm thinking I might want to ask him, if there's interest in this group, whether he'd be willing to run some sessions for other organisations, because if that's something we can contribute, I'd be very happy to try.
Great.
We also had an argument about what is active listening, and then we fell out about whether those were the right words, because
and then you stop listening to each other,
and then we stop listening, and it's fine.
Oh yes, oh yeah, that's absolutely it. And I think that sounds fantastic, Ben. I certainly would be really interested in that. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about some colleagues I work with who do the Compassionate Communities project, where they are experts in listening, and they do a thing called a listening circle, and I'm trying to learn from them. And I think part of their USP is listening, and actually they have a lot to teach. And they probably need to set themselves up actually as a group who will go out and in reach to organisations and teach them how to listen. I know they've done some work with JLR and other kind of non-health and non-statutory service providers. So I think there probably are resources out there, but I just wonder whether it's something that our organisations would want to sign up to, or we just do something on a low level scale and then kind of use the outcomes of that to scale it up and get our organisations interested in it. I don't know what people think about that.
I'm capturing it as a statement so we could put it back to the main room and also go into the email, Leslie. Jim, you've just got your hand up. We're in our last 5 minutes now.
Yeah, just slightly digressing from that point, I guess, but just around is how we get to listen to those people whose voices aren't necessarily heard, because it's easy to listen to those who shout a lot and are part of active groups, but I guess that's a real challenge, is getting to listen to as wide a variety of people, and particularly those whose voices aren't necessarily heard. So I guess that's a challenge rather than, I'm not able to give you the answer.
Yeah. And Manjit?
Unmute myself there. Hi, Claire. This has actually brought up one of the topics that I remember that we learnt on the Changemaker course. I would recommend for people actually to go on to the Changemaker course, because we did actually a session on different types of listening styles, and I think it's a really key aspect of this because there's a number of questions within the one question, isn't there, for the one that we're looking at today. But if we don't get the listening part right, and we're not actively listening and actually taking on board what the community are saying, and also taking into account all the different aspects, the barriers to them actually communicating with us, I think then we're not going to be able to get onto the next stage of getting the evidence from citizens about what they really want it to look like, because we haven't got the first layer right. It's building that relationship, but it's important that we are listening, and as Leslie said, and somebody else mentioned, Ben, about do we have the skills to do that, because it's a skill, isn't it? And sometimes we think we are listening, we're actively listening, or systematically listening, and we're not, because as Jane said, because we're thinking of, we've already preempted what we wish to do, and then time is against us. As you said, Leslie, we've got like this tick list of things to get through and a time frame, and I think because of those restrictions, we tend to skip this and go on to the actual do. So I think, I think it's really key, and I think the training, and I obviously learned quite a lot about that, the skills of listening when I was on the Changemaker course. So, highly recommend for those that haven't been on the Changemaker.
So that's the course that Grapevine runs. So yeah, we also teach listening as part of ways of mobilising community responses and community action, which is the course that Manjit did. So in the dying moments of this breakout, I just wanted to say there's also something about being clear about what you're listening for. So there is diagnostic listening, which was what Leslie was talking about, but you might also want to do strengths-based listening. You might be listening for what's going well, what's going right, when were things good in your life, when were things working well, what was going on at that time, how could we get some of that back. So there's something about being intentional about what it is you're listening for. So we're listening for potential leadership and the potential to act on things that the person cares about. But you might be listening for something else. I'm just trying to say you might want to widen it beyond listening for the needs and the eligibility, service eligibility sort of listening, which I suspect is a lot of what you're trying to go beyond. And the other thing, I guess, would be that listening isn't just one step in a process and you stop doing it. It would be like systematic listening would be, it's like co-production. It's about how you do what you do all the time. It isn't just a one-off exercise. You'd continually kind of like be responding to feedback from the people this is for and involving them in getting it right again a bit further down the road. So I think of listening as, we tend to make it we tend to put it into a process. It's about quality improvement, it's about feedback, it's about learning loops, and then we box it off down there. But I think it's about how do we make it something that's...
Do we have everyone? It looks like we have everyone back. So I hope that was a useful discussion. It certainly was in my room, and it felt like just the start of the conversation,
Right.
as opposed to, we'd wrapped everything up today. So in terms of feeding back, is there anyone? I think we only had rooms 2 and 3. Yeah. So does anyone from room 2 want to start and kick us off with a bit of feedback?
Well, we failed at the first hurdle, which is that I didn't identify anyone who was going to take notes. So I took notes. Did someone? I don't know if anyone else took notes, but I'm happy to try and read my notes. So very quickly, that there can be hesitancy around public services doing very open-ended listening because you're worried you have to have an answer or a solution or a bit of resource, and if you haven't got that, you don't want to let people down. So there's a kind of hesitancy and a bravery needed to do quite open listening. Jim Crawshaw talked about a really great piece of co-production work that the City of Culture Opportunity had brought forth, which was to rough sleeping service workers and rough sleepers themselves coming together over a period of workshops to create a piece of theatre about what is really important to people experiencing rough sleeping. And from that were derived service priorities that have then gone on to inform a strategy. And he thought one of the key things that made that quite successful and not defensive or hard to hear was the fact that it was developed together. All voices were in there equally together. We talked about, could we have a Coventry and Warwickshire approach to doing better and different listening? And would there be some appetite to come together to think about what do we need, what do we lack? This is a skill. Could we do something about gaining and spreading and transferring skill? We talked about what you're listening for. So sometimes what you're listening for is service eligibility. Sometimes what you're listening for is it's an NHS diagnostic listening. And there are levels of skill and subtlety in some of that. And how do we pass that on? And Leslie gave an example of, an NHS professional who's very experienced can ask a few questions about home life and then understand almost everything they need to understand about what's going on for someone. And a younger person might be just using a checklist. How do we, that wisdom from experience of listening, how do we transfer that? How do we reach the seldom heard? So it's very easy, comparatively easy to start listening to the people we're already in touch with. What about those who are beyond the edge that we're reaching now? We talked about it not being one step in a process, boxed off as being about feedback loops or quality improvement, but something that is systematically happening. Ben talked about how at the University of Warwick they have a really interesting project going on at the moment funded by Spirit of 2012, which has involved or was meant to involve and is now involving training in active listening and deciding what that is and how we can spread it. I'm sorry if I've not done justice to all the ideas, but I think one of the main things that came out was almost a call to action around, do we want to do something together as a whole place around improving our approach to listening and how it really refreshes and improves what we do, and do that in a systematic way. And Leslie asked that question.
And I think from room 3, was it Adrienne? You're feeding back. Thanks.
If it's any help, Claire, equally, I didn't do a very good job of finding anyone to come back to this group with the information. So I'll try and summarise it. But if I miss anything, then please feel free, anyone, to interject and add. So I think we started to talk about the organisational challenges that maybe existed, and I think that there were different perspectives around this. So I think from a council perspective, we started to say that perhaps we were quite transactional in our engagement with people, and that wasn't necessarily in itself very helpful in terms of taking a whole person centred approach. We then started to reflect, as we started to look at things around health, that perhaps there was a whole person approach being taken, but not with a view to bringing whole organisation responses to that person and their needs. And then that started to branch out a little bit wider and saying, and actually we're probably not very good. And I think this is probably something we all would acknowledge, that cross-organisational piece and how we bring together different groups around individuals. So I think probably some of this was around the fact that there was some discomfort expressed around not having the solutions to offer, which I think was the same in your group, Claire, as you've just reported back. And equally, there was a reference to the fact that sometimes what we're doing is responding as the person arrives into our system and is in need of help, when really these conversations need perhaps to have started years ago. So this kind of reflection that is that we're responding at that moment in time. There were some discussions then. We started to get into a conversation around hope training that had been provided, and in particular, an hour a week around the Hope Cafe side of things, which is an opportunity to almost be in people's homes virtually and have some proper conversations. And we started to explore the fact that probably the space that we talk to people in influences the amount that we can generate out of that conversation, and probably the insight and honesty that we can gain from that dialogue. And so we were kind of then talking about the opportunities that might be in that space, you know, doing more or less probably away from phones, which the pandemic has driven us towards, and more in people's homes in different conversations. And then we drifted into the fact that actually probably health professionals, and I suspect many other colleagues, actually probably set the scene. So what they're really focusing in on is what they need to get out of that transactional conversation, rather than that whole person piece, and inviting people to be as open as perhaps they might be. And that's probably the point at which we started to kind of close down our discussion, conscious of the time, although we did say that, particularly drawing on some references made by the universities, is actually the opportunity to be better at signposting and to recognise the information we have and think about how we share it is probably something we could explore a bit more. I think probably my overriding reflection on this would be, we were just breaking into a conversation, and it felt like almost if we'd have had a day to really think about this differently, we might have come up with loads of different ideas and solutions, I think.
Adrienne, I think that was a really good summary of the room, from my perspective anyway. So it sounds like there are some sparks of more conversations that we could perhaps have within this space, and something that the core group can think about for future sessions. So yeah, thank you everyone for that. I'm handing back over to Adrienne now for her section.
Forgive me for a second while I just bring a presentation up on screen. Can we see the Coventry Connects slide? Yeah, that's brilliant. So I think this is interesting timing, really. So firstly, just to introduce myself, I'm Adrienne, look after customer services for Coventry City Council. And interestingly for me, this conversation that we've just had has been an insightful one, and I think feeds into some of the discussion that I wanted to try to open up probably off the back of this discussion today. Probably not by design, but quite helpfully it's opened up the discussion. So thanks for providing me with an opportunity to talk to you. I've got some slides to go through. Some of them are a bit busy, I don't propose to go through all of them in detail, but perhaps to just highlight some things as we walk through them. And I'd like to think that today really is a bit of an opportunity to start a conversation rather than for it to be the whole conversation. I'd also like to think that the agenda that I'm going to talk to you about is something that both traverses organisational boundaries and probably sector boundaries, which is why today the conversation is about how could we maybe do things differently and do things together as we move forwards. So probably the place to start before I jump into any of those slides is to reflect back on the pandemic and the recent times. And I think it's fair to say that probably like many of you, my world and the world of my team has changed significantly during the pandemic. And I class ourselves as pretty lucky really, in so much as we stayed open, our doors remained open the whole time. Our phone responses and other responses changed, but we stayed connected, I think, to our customers and to the people of the city throughout this. And I do genuinely think we were lucky for that, because it kept us quite grounded and thinking about things differently, perhaps, as we went about our day-to-day work. I'd say that the people that we saw changed maybe through the work that we undertook, or maybe it's just that we started to see people. Historically, we'd have seen hundreds of people through our doors every week, and now we were seeing probably less than 100 a week, most of whom were desperate, many of whom whose worlds had probably been chaotic for some considerable time, and who were probably living in poverty for a long time and weren't necessarily particularly affected by COVID, but it might have just been the last straw for them. And I think we started to change the way that we engaged in those individual one-on-one conversations. So they stopped being just about services and they started being about the person that came in front of us. And that was by necessity, I think, by how they presented, by the conversations we had as a result of how they presented. And whilst I acknowledge it's not the end of the pandemic, I think we collectively through this knew that there was probably no going back to where we started at the beginning. And probably, if I'm really truthful, as a collective, we didn't have a desire as individuals, as human beings. We had no desire, I don't think, to go backwards. It wasn't a space that we particularly wanted to inhabit as we had done before. So we started to sketch out what we thought might be the art of the possible, what we thought we might want to do differently, which was about kind of changing the emphasis away from transactional and more into this kind of strategic impact across the organisation to engage with people differently. So I think at that point, what we started to do was open up our conversations a bit more broadly across the organisation and get a little bit more input to understand whether it's a space there was some appetite for. And I guess I'm pleased to say that as of 2-3 weeks ago, we got some organisational buy-in to this change that I'm going to kind of sketch out with you here today. I think if I move on to the next slide, which kind of summarises for us the change that we wanted to make, or perhaps more importantly, the reason for the change. We've called it Coventry Connects for a genuine set of reasons. So some of it is about connecting digital and digital inclusion. Some of it is about connecting with partners and helping to build services for and around people. Some of that is about connecting individuals with the services and the individuals embedding their views and their voices into change. There's quite a lot in there in terms of what we aspire to achieve out of this. And the principle of connections are the thing that we want to run through this, throughout everything that we change. So there are 4 main themes. The first of these themes looks at resident experience and perhaps more importantly, starting to think about how we might embed the voice of the customer in everything that we do. It involves, if I'm really truthful, starting right at the beginning and being clear about what we stand for, not by service as an organisation, not about the service and what it stands for, but why we're here, what's the point of public sector, local authority, and how we want people to feel when they engage with our organisation. So it starts in that space and it works all the way through to the principle that actually there's a need for us to be extremely transparent. There's a need for us to engage with people throughout their journey. And ultimately the principle that customers might want more than the service that they've come for today. They might want something different from us as a response. The second piece that's in here is about adopting data in everything that we do. I think we learned loads during the pandemic about joining up the dots. We recognised that we already knew lots and lots about people. We already understood a series of things about them in terms of their family makeup, their personal vulnerability, their preference in terms of services. And ultimately, by using that data in a future model, what we want to do is move from offering services when they're asked for and explore that kind of more predictive analytics space to support delivery of services early, and in that almost Amazon-esque way where people who had this also needed these things as well. The next piece of this is around shaping our service offer, but more importantly is doing what we do but better. So there is something in here about being clear about what our offer is. Now that might be being clear about what we offer to vulnerable people, how they can contact us, prioritising their needs and wishes, and looking basically to be able to offer end-to-end services wherever possible through automation. So there's something almost from the supporting people with the greatest need and the greatest difficulty in engaging with us, right the way through to being able to, if we can, at the point the customer asks for a service, being able to deliver it there and then, rather than waiting what might be weeks, days, months, possibly for different service provision. And the final piece of the jigsaw for us is around digital inclusion and the principle of leaving no one behind. One of the things that we recognised through our work during the pandemic was the fact that people rarely engage with digital for the sake of it. And what we want to start to do is build our responses around people's motivations. So that might be for some finding work, it might be for others connecting with their families, it might be for others searching for cheaper retail offers, or for others accessing services. And some of that came out of our conversations on our previous discussion. What we want to do from a digital inclusion perspective is start to understand people's motivators and and build an offer and an opportunity around that, so that we're able to enable them to fulfill their lives rather than simply enable them to transact with our organisation. That's probably, from my perspective, enough in terms of presenting to you today the opportunities that lie ahead. But I guess I just wanted to wrap up my conversational piece by saying, you know, I suspect that other organisations are wrestling with the same sorts of things. I suspect that other organisations are having similar conversations and are articulating similar ideas. And I think that probably started to come out of our group discussions. What I wanted to do today was really put honestly on the table an opportunity to join this conversation up with colleagues who are on this call and beyond where it feels appropriate. This sort of level of detail that I'm sharing with you today is as far as we've got to in our thinking. There's probably loads and loads of stuff that needs to sit under this, and there's probably lots of opportunity to stretch this and bend this differently so that collectively we can deliver a best service. So I'm offering this kind of honestly for discussion today, with a view to seeking your feedback, but equally with a view to continuing the conversation outside of today and seeing where that might take us. So I think from a conversational point of view, that's probably me presented, and I think we're probably back to a group discussion around those questions, if possible, Claire.
Absolutely. Adrienne, is it possible yet? I realise it may not be after this call to share the presentation, or it will be. Okay, so
yeah,
we'll
absolutely. So I guess, Claire, for me, you know, from today's perspective, we've just started talking about some of these things, talking about putting people at the centre of this, and talking about communities and where they might play a part. But I guess I'm keen to see if other organisations are in the same space of wanting to think to take things forward.
I don't know if someone's trying to speak or if someone's having another conversation. Great.
Hang on, maybe I'm not on mute.
Oh yeah, is that Ruth? Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I don't know. We've got colleagues here from the NHS. Both hospitals and Swift. I'm interested in you as organisations, and if what Adrienne is describing strikes a chord, was part of your world as well.
Yes, it absolutely does, and we're not as far advanced in our thinking on it as the council clearly are, but we're starting to think about, you know, we're moving to more digital offers. We're thinking about sort of patient portals. What does that look like? It's you know, there has to be a menu of options for different people depending on their needs. There's a risk with digital that you further deepen health inequalities and inequity of access. So we've got to be really careful with some of that stuff. For the first time at UHCW, we're including citizens in our engagement around strategy. We've never done that before. So, you know, we're thinking about that, but definitely around digital. Any learning that we can glean from the work that Adrienne's just spoken about would be brilliant, actually. We're talking about the same group of people here, people who live in Coventry and Warwickshire, so it'd be good to join up on that, absolutely. And likewise, we can share anything we learn with you.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that would be, you know, a great opportunity, I think, Leslie. In terms of your thinking, so obviously you're tackling some of this, is there an opportunity for us to kind of join forces and come up with some of these solutions collectively? Because I'll be honest, while we might be clearer probably about, you know, what's in front of us, it's not necessarily the clarity that sits underneath it. And I think that kind of and so what question is the next phase to explore, really.
Yeah, and I think Blair is on the call somewhere. Blair, I'm thinking about something like care collaborative, council and hospital, council and NHS, and how we might, I mean, we're thinking about developing a comms and engagement work stream in that. So that seems like a great opportunity to link up. Blair, what are your thoughts on that? If you're here, I'm sure I saw you. There he is.
Yeah, it's the two key areas. Well, having had some conversations over the last couple of days, three key areas really for the care collaborative in taking the learning from the kind of the integrated health and care program that will transition into the care collaborative is the data and insights needs to be at the very front and center of that, alongside the engagement and alongside communication, and being deliberate in separating those two elements out. So that has to be the starting point for the enabling functions to support the care collaborative to have any degree of success in moving forward. So that's the kind of the proposal really of how we can bake that in right from the outset, rather than it being something that is considered further down the line at some point, which is always a classic mistake of change programs.
Yeah, that's helpful.
How do we take that forward then, Blair? So who is lined up to kind of lead on the engagement side, or have we not got that far yet? You're on mute, Blair. How are you?
Sorry, am I off mute now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a development group that's been established. So they just had the first meeting last Wednesday. So that group is basically pulling together the kind of the outline, focusing primarily on what is the function of that care collaborative. But also, to kind of add to the complexity in that is being able to differentiate between the function of the collaborative in its whole, the function of a host provider within that as well, that sits and acts on behalf of the collaborative itself, and also has a role to play in terms of management of funding and of contracts moving forward, with an accountability to the integrated care system. So that is in development, but obviously as the function element is worked on further, that will then lead into the delivery and the appropriate resources being called upon in terms of a challenge back to the ICS to outline where is an input and a need. So there's two kind of inputs to help to resolve that. One is what can come from the ICS. The second is what does then the care collaborative partners in itself have to contribute into the delivery across a place level, as the care collaborative will be aligned to.
Okay, that's helpful. I think we're planning on running, and this is open to anyone really, we're planning on running some internal workshops which are about starting to try to scratch the surface on some of this, to identify maybe some broader opportunities. So I'll happily share the presentation and equally the invite out to people if they want to attend. That seems a sensible way forwards.
I'm going to confess that I didn't completely understand. There was I couldn't really completely process and understand what you're presenting, Adrienne. I think that's partly because my head is often in a different space that isn't working on that scale and about I guess services and the digital aspect of that. I suppose what I'm wondering is where do people and communities fit in, if they need to fit in, as sources of solutions themselves, or as sources of I'm going to try, this is a bit clumsy, sources of resource, assets, as and because that for me, that was always an important part of the prevention and early help space. The thing that ultimately keeps people well and having good lives is really beyond the capacity of services, but services might have a role in sparking that or strengthening it where you spot it. And I couldn't quite see how it, and this might be asking too much of it, but how your model would kind of relate to that way of thinking about things.
So I lost the end bit, Claire, but I think I understood what you were asking. So around community building its own resilience and solutions out of that. So I think I'm not. So that model is simply a list of things. It's not a set of answers. It's not the detail that needs to sit under that. There is a community's priority that sits slightly separate to this, but is completely interlinked with this, I think. And I suspect as we start to get into the layers that sit below this, so there's a community support piece which we're starting out at Bell Green. So there's probably a series of layers of things that sit within that are exactly that, Claire. And probably, if I'm really truthful, some of this is about saying to the people on this call and beyond, is saying, I don't have all the answers. I don't imagine for one moment, candidly and honestly, that the organisation has all of the answers or has all of the thinking that might be really helpful in taking this forward and challenging whether these are the right things and whether they stretch our imagination as wide, or indeed just saying, could it be this? And I think genuinely each of those small blocks is a series of things that we need to rip to pieces and understand in a different way. So there's probably 2 or 3 blocks where that could sit, and I think I would genuinely welcome yourself, other colleagues saying, but what about this? What about that? What about the other? And helping to kind of create a richer agenda than is probably possible to show on a series of 3 or 4 slides. That's being honest. I think it has to be there. But the what and the how and just how far we can stretch that, colleagues may have a much better idea than I. I think we've got a couple of people with raised hands. I'm not sure who went first. Leslie?
Oh, okay. I'm really sorry because I had to jump out to another call and I came back again. Adrienne, you might have said this at the beginning, but is this a kind of being driven top down, or is this something that colleagues have kind of thought we need to do this, we need to grab hold of it?
It's the latter, to be honest, Leslie.
Yeah.
Where it genuinely did start out of, it genuinely started out of a really small seed of conversation. That's the truth. So it started from we don't want to go back. We want to make some of these functions permanent because they've answered a series of things that we need in place, not just now, but for the future. We want to, engage differently. And actually through this, probably that getting to know people in a lot different way, in a more human way than a transactional way, started to inform this. It's been built out of that. That's where it came from. It came out of genuine experiences. It built and it grew. We invited some people to take part in it and to help to shape it and pull it to pieces a little bit and give their commentary. And there's more slides than the ones I've shared with you, which I'm more than happy to share what's already there. and that it's that we then took to the organisation, rather than the organisation bringing it to us and saying, you know, this is what we want to fulfil. So we collectively then took that to the organisation, and the organisation has bought that as a set of principles. The what, you know, we've got to kind of work that through, which is why it you know, it is a genuine offer. It isn't you know, organisationally it'll be this brand and this is how it feels. It is a let's grow it and build it as we go type situation. I don't know if that helps or it's the right or wrong answer.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. It really inspires me. And I think as well, does that mean then that you've got kind of freedom to do this at the pace that suits you, and you're not sort of, you have to get this done by a certain time and blah, blah, blah. You've got time to kind of develop it and go deep into it. And yeah, that's brilliant. Cool.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've got some things that, you know, candidly, tactically, we can do and will do organisationally that are internal, very, very internal, about, you know, systems and process and structures and all that sort of stuff that actually will enable us to build momentum. But then those richer conversations, we need to create the space and manage the organisation expectations around
that. I had two thoughts which I'm desperately trying to hold on to in my head. One is, this is definitely thinking and doing. So I just wonder if there's actually kind of what I might call a bit of an academic piece here. I think there is a real kind of conceptual thinking thing, and I just wonder if this is the sort of thing that it would be really great to see an organisation like the local authority engage with one of our academic providers on. You know, School of Social Sciences at Birmingham would be really interested in this, or, you know, possibly Coventry or Warwickshire, I don't know, I've got less connections, but it feels to me that it's definitely a thinking piece as well as a doing operationalisation piece. And I mean, maybe I haven't been involved in the right work, but I've rarely seen us really take advantage of the fact that we're sitting in the middle of a city with two big, you know, academic providers and others around us. So if there's anybody on the call that's got those kind of connections, I think that would be really interesting. And then my other just thought was about how we learn to link in nationally as well as obviously regionally. So how do we link in? So for example, when Donna came and chatted to us last time, you know, that spurred me, at least initially, to be looking at some of those, you know, think local, you know, again, and it may just be, Adrienne, the work I've been involved in, but I feel like often we're on the precipice of doing something new, but all the energy and all the thinking is coming from also the people that are trying to do it, whereas there are people that have gone before, and there could be some learning from other people. I think I would always exercise some caution then, because people just want a product. They don't want to go through the painful process, which of course is where all the learning and really where the beauty is. So I don't really like just saying, oh, well, you know, Barking and Dagenham did that and it was brilliant, so we'll do it too. But I think there's something in learning from people who, like I say, have gone this way slightly ahead or whatever. And I don't know, I mean, I could commit to doing some Google searching, you know, I could commit to doing some reading about this or finding out, and maybe other people could as well, just to sort of say, well, where are some of these other, you know, pioneers who are thinking about, for example, the customer experience. I've just literally just started a master's at Birmingham, and I met my other students last week, and one of them, I thought, oh, she's got the same job as Adrienne. You know, she was from another local authority, called herself, you know, the head of customer experience, and I thought, oh, she might be able to help Adrienne. Do you know what I mean? So I think, I mean, it's apparently random, isn't it? But I guess you have to choose to believe that ultimately your connections are not random, and there is gold to find from other people. So that was just my thoughts as you were.
No, they're really helpful, Claire. I hadn't gone to the academic piece, but you know, colleagues on the call might have a view on that one. But the national thing, I think, is highly sensible. So, you know, we've already identified, I think, the digital inclusion world, that there's some local authorities that are streets ahead of us in terms of their learning and their capability. And there are some that are quite closely aligned to the sorts of space that we want to get into, which is brilliant. And then there are some like ourselves who recognise that there's probably a need, but aren't in a space to be fulfilling it at this point in time. And I think we're starting to move along that scale. But I think, happy, really, really happy to take the learning from other people. Claire, did you have your hand up? Sorry.
I've now totally forgotten why I put my hand up and what I was going to say. It's just like it's completely disappeared. So I thought, I think I better put my hand down. I don't know. Maybe it'll come to me at 2 a.m. You know, I'll send you an email, Adrienne, at 2 a.m.
That's fine.
So, but now that I think I was going in a similar direction to Jane in that I was thinking about how we've been invited by Donna Hall to do, a bit of an opinion piece or a thought piece, as she called it, on moving from thinking to doing, actually, the other way. And, you're describing an example of how the pandemic has perhaps accelerated and grown a direction you were already thinking about going in, perhaps flavoured it more with let's get away from transactional interactions and have different kinds of interactions with those we must interact with. So maybe there's a story here that could be part of what we talk about for New Local. And I think, yes, this is it. This is it. This is what I was actually thinking of, which is related. I think for this network, there's learning from your story about how you gathered traction for the seed of an idea that was formed, during and accelerated during and after the pandemic, because that is what the network is really interested in. So there's some lessons here for the rest of us about how you had an idea that then did seem to take off and gain influence internally, and what could we as fellow change makers sort of learn from that. I don't know that we can do that now, but there is something to think about there for the rest of the network. I don't know what other people think. Okay, that sounds like silence, but nevertheless, I think it is what our network is about, and you're kind of the first to sort of go from that pandemic experience into some real kind of action that's gathered a bit of support. I mean, Leslie's right, I suppose, that there are these risks then, aren't there, that you get swept away, you kind of you lose control of your baby a little bit, but all of that is learning too. How do you then negotiate the path that you start to go on?
I think that's interesting, Claire, an interesting observation, in so much as obviously my team were really quite knee deep in some of this. Some of my team were, part of pulling this together. I can't sit here and say it's all my thought process, because it genuinely isn't. And as it started to become bigger and became shared organisationally and at a more strategic level, some of my team, I guess, were defensive and quite uncomfortable about what that might mean or not mean, and how it might eventually look or not look, based on perhaps a set of ideas that they might have had in their heads about that. And I think we spent a little bit of time actually talking about the fact that in order for anything to fly, in order for anything to make a difference, other people had to own it, and it was no good like 2 or 3 people owning it. It had to be owned organisationally, and that's still a journey to go on. Don't get me wrong, we haven't got all that sorted, but it has been a genuine, honest conversation that we've had. You've got to accept that other people will have views, and that's what's that's really important, to allow it to take off and for your ideas to become realised. So yeah, it is an interesting space to reflect on.
Other questions? I can't see any hands, but are there any other thoughts or reactions, questions for Adrienne?
I was just going to say, Claire, I think it's a really exciting model that Adrienne and her team and other contributors have sort of begun to design, and I can see it, you know, as somebody working on the partnerships and community program at the council, I can just see how, you know, I'm not saying it won't be a challenge, but tying it all together and sharing the learning across all of the different initiatives that we're all probably involved in, and using that Coventry Connects as something, as a sort of a vehicle for which to deliver on all the different things, all the other improvements or scenarios we want to deliver on. I just think it's really exciting, and it's, for me, it's sort of helpful to see it all brought together and sort of different strands of it, and how it becomes almost like a framework for delivering that sort of more joined up approach to sort of service delivery and connecting with our residents and our citizens.
So I think the sensible thing for me to do, Claire, after this is to share some slides and to leave the door open. I'll give my contact details to colleagues if that's okay, and just, you know, genuinely close on a bit of a, you know, I'd really welcome people's input. I really think this could be exciting, if much more exciting if we do it together than if we do it in isolation as a council. I think, you know, the opportunities for us to share, and just reflecting back on our group conversation is, you know, we were recognizing in there that even down to signposting and advice and everything else, we all wanted to do more for the people that came to us, but actually didn't necessarily have a vehicle. And I think this does start to provide a vehicle and an opportunity to come together. So, you know, it's a genuine personal and organisational offer for people to be involved in that conversation. So thank you for people's time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you. So there's just a few little bits from me, little reminders. So we, obviously after Donna Hall made her invitation, a couple of people came forward and said they'd be interested in writing something. Since then, Andrea has expressed an interest in writing something as well about this idea of thinking, going from thinking to doing, when it comes to working differently with communities, which was our theme, I think. I don't know about you, I've just been a bit overwhelmed with work. We haven't made any progress with that, but I'm wondering whether that's something we might come together as a subgroup to look at in December, if we can get some dates for early to mid-December, and so that we can make a start on that. I have no idea how to make a start on having 7 people write something, but we'll give it a go. Decide what we want to say and who's going to say it. Is that okay? December's better for you, Andrea. Great. Okay. I sent out an email about whether there was appetite to go as a little group to the Stronger Things conference in the spring. So that's the new local conference. I think Leslie was keen. I think Jane was keen. Maybe if you put in the chat box if you'd like to go. It's free, but it will be face-to-face, which means we'll need to travel to London to do it. So there will be cost attached in that way. But perhaps, again, just put in the chat box if you'd be up for that, and we could get some places booked. Maybe some. It'd be the first time I've been on a train since forever, but it'll be interesting. You've asked for tickets, yeah. It would be great to go as a small group, and then we can come back and talk about it. Brilliant. I think that's me done, actually. That was just a few little updates. Okay, yeah, Adrienne, the more the merrier. So, I mean, I don't know whether we should try and all book our own tickets, but let each other know that we've done that. That I might be creating a job for myself if I take on any responsibility for that. So let's book our own tickets, but know who is going and try and hook up about being there together. Okay, so I think I'm handing over now to Taylor from Warwickshire. He's another member of the organising team, and he's just going to see us out of the meeting. Oh no, Taylor's gone. He's told me he's gone. Okay, yeah, so he's had to leave. Oh, okay, right, okay. So maybe, Natalie, would you like to do the last bit? Okay.
I could try to do the last bit. I'm very unprepared for the last bit. But again, I think it's just to say thank you to everyone again for contributing and coming along and discussing things. And again, I would urge you all to flex this network in between sessions. Our next session is we're possibly looking around the 15th of January. I might have made that date up, but yes, so January around this date again. But again, in between that, it doesn't mean we can't keep networking and sharing and having those conversations, because I think particularly in the breakout room I was in, it felt like some people were on the same page and maybe wanted to carry that on. So again, we look forward to seeing you in January, but in the meantime, you know, let's keep using this network, and we'll have a think about what we want to cover next session. If you do have thoughts or things you want to bring to the network, again, please just reach out to one of us. All of our email addresses, I think, are on the chains that Claire sends out. So yeah, I think it's just a huge thank you again. Does anyone have anything they want to add? Adrienne, Claire, Jane?
I would just say that obviously I'll do the email soon. You'll get copies of these recordings, those who weren't here and those who were here. I encourage back, just echoing what Natalie said, if it sounds like in your, that was a really rich 15-minute discussion in my group as well as what sounds like in your group. And if you want to continue that, all the emails are visible and shared because people gave consent for that. There's nothing to stop you from carrying on having that conversation. There were a couple of calls to action to have a think about, which I'll put in the email about could we have a Coventry and Warwickshire approach to doing better listening, and could we, you know, do we want to engage with an academic partner, one of the universities, around emerging the model that Adrienne is emerging, and also thinking about how do we talk about that perhaps in the blog. So that kind of stuff will be going on, can be going on and will be going on, even if we're not seeing each other as this network. But if we have a bit of a break from now until the 18th of January and then start up with every 6 weeks from that point, and we'll automatically, it'll land in your calendars. If that's okay with everyone, yeah? Anybody got anything they'd like to say at the end that they haven't had a chance to say? Now's your time, because we're a little bit ahead of time. There's nothing wrong with finishing early, but if this is a moment, if anyone's got anything to drop in, add, say, Manjit.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking for where the hand signal thing is. It's at the bottom there. I was actually just about to type something to Adrienne, and I was just wanted to ask a question around, you mentioned you gave some data around the engagement, how your engagement face-to-face, obviously, with service users had really drastically reduced. But did you find that there was positivity in terms of those engagements that you didn't have before because they had to physically come in to the building, that actually was enhanced because of having to work digitally? And is that the way forward that you're looking at? That's been really successful. Let's continue doing that. Maybe actually being able to engage with those hard to reach communities where they've gone through lots of poverty, that they can't afford to get on a bus to actually get to wherever it is that they need to get to. Did you find that I don't know if you have that data.
Yeah, so I mean, we have got some data in terms of volumes of people and those sorts of things. That's, you know, it's not a problem to share that. I think if I'm genuinely truthful about our experience, is that all of our channels served us better almost during the pandemic than they have ever had before in different ways, I think. So our telephone channel became particularly popular around, you know, because there wasn't that kind of common face-to-face space. People didn't want to be in a face-to-face setting if they could avoid it. I think that's the first thing to say. Lots of people retreated. You know, we would have seen up to 800 people a day in this centre, and actually that went down to maybe 20 a day. So that was, you know, that was the stark change that we saw. Some of that we drove. Some of that we said we don't want people coming in paying cash. We need to be thinking about you, Mr. Customer, but at the same time, our own people, we need to look after them. Actually, we'll be here for our vulnerable people, and we'll be here for people who are facing particularly challenging situations. So our phone took off, and actually a lot of people probably won't ever bother coming in face to face again, I think would be my honest assessment. At the same time, we launched web chat. So we hadn't had web chat before. We launched it because we wanted a free route through for people who might have used face to face because financially they might have struggled and town was an easy space to get to. And that took off phenomenally in a way that I, honestly, genuinely, I hadn't anticipated would happen. but really did take off to the point where we're starting to invest in it in chatbot technology at this point in time, which is, you know, automating some of that engagement, but still enabling people to come through to an advisor if they need to. So I was quite shocked by that. The people that we've been left seeing in our face-to-face setting, as I've suggested, are people who have either really complex situations and they just don't know where to go and they don't know what to do, or they're facing a particularly chaotic lifestyle. So they'll come in and quite often they'll spend quite a bit of time with us. Whereas historically, they might have been almost invisible to us, to be honest with you. We might not have really seen them alongside 700 and odd other people that probably would almost invisible to us. And we had previously acted probably as a bit of almost a concierge type approach of, you know, just get people to the right place, seeing the right people. Where now our people see and spend a lot more time with individuals, and our street homeless spend quite a lot of time in here with us. And I have to be honest and say that, you know, there have been some really sad stories that we've witnessed throughout this. It's been an ask, I think, for our people. It's been difficult for our people to go from volume and very transactional to few but very detailed, and probably drawing on their own personal experiences, life experiences rather than work experiences. It's been quite a move for our people. But actually, I think the end result of that is we haven't had issues with security. So we might have, with that similar cohort, we might have been escorting people off the premises in the past. It's not what we've witnessed. They've had time, they've spent time with us. They've perhaps felt like they've been dealt with in a very human way that they might not have done before. And it's those sorts of things that I think we don't want to go back from. And our people ultimately, I think, would reflect that they feel better about the job they're doing. They feel like they're making a genuine difference. And you know, as I say, 800 people through your doors to actually making a cup of tea and getting a bite to eat for someone and just sitting and talking to them is just such a difference, you know, and walking that journey with them, whatever that might be, is actually spending the time to do it with them. So I think that's the sort of learning we want to take into our community's priority work is, you know, we don't need to see everyone face to face. We absolutely don't. But there are some people that's what they need, and that's what is the best thing for them. And I think that's where we need to learn to make a difference. I'll be really honest, Manjit, of all the things the team has done differently, and we have, some of our team have been registering deaths during that time, some of our team have been out delivering food parcels and PPE, we've done all sorts of different things. But the one thing that will stay with me through all of this is some of the stories of some of the people that have walked through our doors, and the difference just treating them like a human being has made rather than a number. And that might not have got a different outcome for them at the end of it. It may not, but the experience has been far different, you know, and I think it's that's lived with me the most through this.
And it goes back to the listening, isn't it? That your team have actually built those skills with no specialist training, that they've just brought what they know from their own experiences, you know, into their work environment, which is taking them off the page with regards to that tick list of and those processes, and it's become more humanistic, isn't it, approach to the work, isn't it? It's because every person's different and it doesn't fit into a box, does it? But that's really good to hear. And
I think some of that, Manjit, just to kind of say this, is some of that is how we manage our service has changed dramatically through this. So, you know, down to pretty much what we're wearing, we're all in cash, we're none of us kind of in business attire, we're managing that engagement really differently. I'm not asking how many widgets, I'm not saying we need to clear the queues in this way, you know, we've just thrown out everything and just gone, what do they need? And I'm not being flippant when I say that, I'm being really truthful. And probably it's the space that's enabled us to do that. Probably the time that we've had available has enabled us to do that. But we've also learned a lot about not only what we need to be organisationally, but I think personally we've taken a lot from that as well.
Absolutely, that's really good to hear. And I know in early help we're and perhaps many of the services here today have had to sort of relook at the way in which we deliver our services, and there's actually been some really positive things that have come through COVID that's pushed us in a different way of working. But however, it's brought engagement in a different way to, as you said, families that wouldn't necessarily have been engaged. But it's made us to look at a reset and recovery plan, but reflecting as well, isn't it, on a way of working that we would never have thought about, that we'd already preempted that our families wouldn't, as you said, engage in that chat, sort of function that you had and that you have. So it is it's just thinking outside the box and being flexible for our communities, and but they're not dismissed. And it's great to hear. We certainly, from an early help point of view, would like to share where we are, and I think all of us have probably got stories to share about our different ways of working, and how we wish to sort of continue that on a, we're calling it a hybrid way of working, that if a family did need to fill in a form and it had to be physically brought in, can it be done in a different way? Can we look at different ways of of getting that information or making that payment? So it's really great to hear. It really is. Yeah.
I guess I'd say, Manjit, let's join forces. We'll invite people to the workshops. Join the
yeah, I think so, because the more that we can tell our stories about the things that the good, the challenges, but also the good things that have come from it, and we can pull together, then we can come up with sort of a strategy moving forward for the communities of Coventry, and that's who we're serving, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Last couple of words to Leslie, and then we'll be at time. Thanks.
Thank you, Adrienne.
Oh, it's a great honour to have the last word. No, I just wanted to say, Adrienne, I my ears pricked up when you said about staff actually enjoy working in this new way, and I'd just like to hear more about that. What does that mean? Is it because they're moving away from a more kind of process-driven, transactional way of engaging with people to doing something that could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think I'm in danger of oversimplifying, I suppose, really. But our team have gone from, the title is meet and greet. That's been their job, is to make sure people are okay, get them to the right place in the right time, and deal with their low-level inquiries so they're able to leave the organisation with what they need on that day. What I think they've become is probably essentially a pair of ears. That's probably, and I'm at risk of oversimplifying that and underplaying it. But if I had £5 for every cup of tea that I see being made for a customer now, while they sit down and have a chat to them and a conversation about their lives, or while I see Jan, who's one of our team, maybe going around the corner to buy someone a sandwich, or someone else, that we've moved into just a really human space, and I'm trying to kind of find a way to make that mean, to articulate it, but we've gone from, I don't ask how many people we see anymore. I'm not interested in how many people we see anymore. What I am interested in is how we've helped them. And so we'll have just completely different conversations. And the team manager in here, he'll come to me and say, this is the situation, this is what I think we need to do, but we're being told this. And we'll just go, we'll do that. Like, what's the point? We need to break and bend processes. We need to change. We need to be something different. But almost to some degree, they need the cover to enable that to happen, which I think is probably my job, which is, actually, this is not about adhering to rules and silos and everything else. This is what's the quickest way to get them from A to B to help them. And so some of this, I suspect, if I'm really truthful, Leslie, is the work we've got to do is almost retrofitting some of these enablers around people, because we've done it because we've had the autonomy to do it. And as organisations get back to normal, we need to make sure that autonomy doesn't squeeze that back. We need to push that out and create processes that enable that, I think. But our people generally, honestly, talk to people, spend time, don't judge. I think it's probably a massive one that we've realised is, don't judge a person's scenario based on what you see in front of you. Don't judge them based on a decision that sits in a process around, arrears or their lives or what, don't judge them based on that. Judge it by the conversation. And I'm oversimplifying it. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I've got a picture to give you, and maybe the best people.
No, it's really clear. Yeah, it's really clear. Thank you. I completely understand what you're saying, and that's great. I think that's a really important point in everything that you've done, isn't it? Because your staff now will engage with the community in a completely different way, and that's like a virtuous circle, isn't it? Yeah. And what will that do for retention and in recruitment and all of those things? So that's great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you.
Well, we're now at 2 o'clock. That was great. I'm glad we had that last opportunity for another 10 minutes of discussion. It was really helpful. So thank you all. See you in a while, January, but keep in touch with each other via email, take up the offers that are coming out to continue the conversation with Adrienne, and we'll be in touch via email as well. So have good Christmases. I can't believe I said that. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye, everyone.